Level 3, Exposing the Fiction. Imagine living out the transformation D.H. Lawrence describes. This is the third level of telling the truth, the place where telling the truth and living the truth become the same. This is the place of which the Hindus say, if you speak the truth long enough, your word becomes universal law. The third level of telling the truth occurs when you admit that who you are is not who you have been pretending to be. What you have been selling other people on and selling yourself on is not who you are. You don't really know who you are. You confess disillusionment with beliefs you used to stand for and various sales pitches you did and still do for your act. This is at first embarrassing, then for a while something to brag about, and then just a description of what happened to you in the course of growing up. The process of demythologizing yourself is begun by bragging about all the things which, in your false modesty, you were pretending you didn't care about. You have to go through your vanity and the suffering associated with it. You have to show off and be embarrassed, both of which are egotism, and you can't skip, dodge, or get around this step. You have to praise yourself openly rather than manipulate to suck praise. You have to acknowledge being a secret hero to yourself and confess the putrid vanity of all of your usual phony self-denigration. You have to admit what a worm and a liar you are and go through the feelings that come up when you tell the truth about all of this. If you have never truly embarrassed yourself by what you had to say about yourself, you don't know shit from Shinola about transformation. When you get to telling the truth about all of it, you are at level 3. Who you are becomes a more description-centered in the here and now, and less of a story about your life. I'm going to read that again. Who you are becomes more a description centered in the here and now, and less of a story about your life. When you admit your act, you also admit your ignorance. You confess that you developed your act in order to not appear lost and in hopes of finding your way by faking it. Then you admit that you are lost and faking it most of the time these days as well, not just in the far-removed past. Before you acted smart, now you acknowledge ignorance like it is gold. I conduct an 8-day workshop several times every year. One of the exercises we do involves telling the entire story of our life to the group while being videotaped, answering everyone's questions, and then watching the tape. People demonstrate their attachment to various times in their lives and are moved at the places kept precious to memory. The most remembered times are usually the hard times, and the person whose story it is turns out to be a hero or heroine in spite of difficult or unfair circumstances. Usually, the younger a person is, the longer it takes them to tell their story. Younger people, in their 20s, seem to have more significant moments in which details and interpretations of meaning are very important. It is this ego attachment to having heroically survived the unfairness of the world that has to be given up at level 3 of telling the truth. This is a breakthrough to the newness and innocence of young awareness after you have been adolescent, mind-bound, and jaded for years. Nobody I know stays at level 3 constantly. Continuous waves of freedom and new egotism, one liberation after another, keep just getting you back to the same place. But if you are in a community which supports you in telling the truth, you get to level 3 more often. Level 3 is sharing with other people in ways that occasionally allow you to overcome your own egotism, including the egotism that comes from thinking you are great for telling the truth. You start considering yourself to be a person who attained level 3. You have attained, in fact, a higher level than most people, grown further than most people, and you are proud of yourself. You know that your act is not who you are, just a useful development that came from growing up. You have been good. You've grown a long way. You have admitted not knowing how to find your ass with both hands with some embarrassment, and you deserve a reward. I'm great. I am a superior being, good for me. This is it. I've grown up. I've attained enlightenment, and I am special, you say to yourself. Your hard-earned humility is quickly followed by pride in your humility. Owning up to the fact that there is no virtue in owning up is the continuation of the third level of telling the truth. What you end up with if you drop your new pride is innocence, much like you had before you developed an identity. What you have then is an identity without much attachment to it. There is less to learn at the third level of telling the truth, but it takes more work and practice than other levels. This level involves practice more than insight. It's like the difference between being a good amateur golfer and becoming a professional in the game. There is a lot of fine-tuning of skills and practice to keep them sharp, and it takes longer than the other three levels generally to take. As far as I know, it is never over. My expertise is at an end here. Not that expertise has ever helped a hell of a lot at earlier levels, but I have had more experience there. To concentrate on things outside of your reputation to yourself doesn't require any effort at all, so it is hard as hell to do. Our minds are always working. This ceaseless mental activity will continue to occur whether we take it seriously or not. But the practice of taking it less seriously can't be taken too seriously, or we are back in our minds again. The less credence we give to our mind's ongoing activity, the more we detach from identifying with that activity, the less it wears us out. Level 3 involves vigilance against being taken over by the mind. You never get a break. There is no reward to it except clarity and a little less strain. What is true changes, so we can't tell the truth once and be done with it. It's an ongoing game. Life is a game in which the rules change as the game progresses, and you have to know where you are in the game to know what rules to play by. Furthermore, you can't ever be certain where you are in the game, and the rules don't always apply. Learning to tell the truth is like learning to play golf. When you learn golf at the first level, you practice the fundamentals until you can hit the ball. At the second level, you polish up your basic skills and lower your score by playing a lot. The third level involves admitting that thinking about your experience and wisdom about golf and 65 cents will get you a cup of coffee, that stories you have and tell about great golf shots or even great golf rounds are just bullshit about golf and not the same as playing golf. When you've got that, you actually start getting better, and you start dreaming of becoming a par golfer. When you start beating the people who used to beat you and beat your teacher, you are solidly at the third level. Because if you were thinking about beating them while you were actually playing, you wouldn't have beat them. You learn that each shot has nothing to do with the last, or with your reputation for good shots at any preceding point. The third level, becoming a professional, is the hardest. To move from good to professional is harder than any of the other advances, even though we're just talking about changing an average score for 18 holes by a few strokes. To go from good to professional is tougher than getting from unskilled to good. Each level of advancement takes more work. At the last level, even though the difference in score is very slight, the difference in playing ability is immense. It takes a long time and an unusual amount of dedication to move from a high level of skill to a higher level. A lot of people go for it and don't make it, in golf and tennis and a lot of other sports. Daydreaming about being a pro can interfere with your practice and your game. Planning each shot and then being present to the shot you are making over and over again is a level of non-hysterical concentration in which the ego of the concentrator doesn't exist because there is no difference in that being concentrated on and the concentrator. No difference between the act and the actor, the play and the player. The ball is hit and it rolls toward the hole, and you wonder why people want to give you credit for it. To really clean up your act with regard to lying is like becoming a pro. If you were well loved as a small child, you have more natural ability for the first level of growth in telling the truth. If you suffered a lot in developing your identity in adolescence, but developed an identity that showed forth regardless of the roles you played, so that the lies you told yourself and others about who you were actually worked, you have a better chance of making it past the second level of telling the truth. You have to have an ego to give one up. You can only admit the truth about your various poses and your fundamental pose, what many personality theorists call the self, after you have developed a fundamental pose that works and serves you well. Then you can become dissatisfied with the limitations imposed by that pose. At level 3, you have to get over your new egotism about having made it to level 3. Once you come off it 2 or 3 times and admit your pretentiousness, and you get to thinking you are pretty virtuous, you must then own up to the fact that owning up to the facts is not a virtue, just growth. There is great despair associated with that. Getting into that despair leads directly to the here and now self. The work is analogous to becoming the best amateur golfer and winning a couple of amateur tournaments and deciding to become a pro. You work and work and work and finally give up. Then, once you have lost hope, if you keep playing, you're a pro. Understanding telling the truth, like understanding golf, is relatively simple. Doing it is a little harder. Still, it's clear that the revelations at each level of telling the truth allow for greater sharing of who a person is and what they are about. When we reveal more, we have less to hide. When we have less to hide, we are less worried about being found out. When we are less worried about being found out, we can pay better attention to someone else. In this way, telling the truth makes intimacy and freedom possible. Now, since I am supposed to be a pro at this, let me tell you more about who I am and what I am about, and we'll see if I cover all the levels. The truth about why I am writing this book. I am writing this book because I want to become famous. I want a lot of people to know my name, now and after I die. I want to be known as a great intellect and perceiver, and I want to be smarter than anyone else. More precisely, I want to be thought to be smarter than everyone else. The pleasure of imagining other people imagining me smarter is an experience of warmth, a dull but pleasant sensation accompanied by a slight smile and an inner vision of people reading my book and talking about me with excitement, like my ex-wife Amy and I did reading Friedrich Nietzsche's, who is long dead. The pleasure of fantasizing about the future is hard to describe. It is a lot like being really wrapped up in a novel or being so into a task that an enjoyable experience of forgetting about time occurs. It is enjoyable mostly because I am not worrying at the time. Fantasy about the future takes the place of worry, and the feeling is pleasant rather than straining. This fantasy about becoming famous has a lot of related fantasies that are also pleasurable. For example, this morning I had the fantasy that a TV interviewer was interviewing me on camera about this book. He asked some TV morning show type of stupid questions, so I refused to answer and began questioning him. I said, "Why do you ask such stupid questions?" I love to imagine putting down one of those dumbass interviewers on the morning talk shows for their sniveling, wimpy ways, pushing people to hurry up and say something. I hate morning shows, and Time Magazine and all the hysterics who work for them. I hate a lot of the stupid people I see on television every day, and I like hating them. I love hating them. I love hating them because it makes me certain that although I may be bad, I am not as fucked up as those people. What a pleasure it is to have a fantasy of malice. When I have the fantasy, I experience energy in my body that is pleasurable to me. I like fantasies of righteous anger. My heart speeds up and I get a hit of energy. It's exciting, like listening to the Lone Ranger on the radio when I was in grade school. The fantasies that invigorate me, that evoke this excitement, are a constant source of entertainment to me. I want to become famous. I am pissed. I get pleasure by imagining myself being more right and powerful than you other assholes. I want to prove that I'm better than you at telling the truth by teaching you how to do it. Hardly anyone knows the value of telling the truth, so it looks like an opportune opening to make a reputation for myself. I also want to be a good man. I want to help people. I imagine myself as the savior. I get off on imagining me saving you from the ravages of your own mind. I get quite a good hit of my own energy from that fantasy. I write this book to warm myself with fantasies. Some of my favorite fantasies are fame, righteous anger, superiority, power, and being a savior. I imagine I want to save everyone. I want to save the whole world. I like to think of myself as helping to save the world. I think I am helping to save the world. I like the work. I believe that evoking feeling as opposed to suppressing feeling will open an opportunity to save the world. I enjoy imagining myself a leader in encouraging people to live out loud, to reveal what is hidden, to tell the truth, and let the chips fall where they may. I like to think of myself as a good man for getting people to adopt this as a life stance from the beginning, as a stand to take in the world. Jesus was a very good, angry man who wanted to save the world. I want to be like Jesus. I want to make money from writing this book. I want to have a lot of people wanting to come see me in therapy or be in one of my groups or come to my radical honesty workshops. I want to get so rich so I can travel and write more. I am already rich, but I'm greedy, and I want more than most people have. I'm just like Judas in that way. I want just a little extra. I also want to write this book in support of people who have been in therapy with me and people who have been with other therapists like me. I want to speak to friends who have grown up with me, some of whom I know and some I don't know. I feel virtuous and proud to be the kind of guy I am. Finally, I write to clarify my own thoughts because I think my thoughts are important. When I have to perform like this, for a while, my life has meaning and clarity. That I have these fantasies, thoughts, and poses is the truth. I am not just playing like they are true to demonstrate my ideas about the levels of truth-telling. I want these things, and I think these things, and masturbate my frontal lobes with these things. So I want to become famous. I am pissed. I want to be a good man. I want to make money. I want to support people. I want to think clearly. That about covers it. These things I want are also false. They are lies. They don't exist. They are bullshit. The fantasies make me feel good. I tell you my fantasies, and some of them make you think I'm a good person, and some make you think I am a bad person. But they all are calculated to make you think I am an exceptional person. If I lie to you in order to make you think I am really an exceptionally good person, and you buy it, maybe I can convince myself. The only trouble is, I know the bastard who is doing the sales pitch in the first place. What could keep me trapped at this level would be withholding fantasy on the basis of fantasy. Like if I didn't tell you the truth about my delusions of grandeur, so you wouldn't think I was an asshole and not buy my book. But I also know that if you are looking for a book that wasn't written by an asshole, you've got a long search ahead of you. Every asshole who writes a book is a neurotic megalomaniac just like me. Most other writers have enough sense to withhold fantasies on the basis of another fantasy that it is politic to withhold fantasies. Most writers are trapped in their minds. You are politic in this way when you imagine yourself a good person because you don't tell your wife about jacking off while thinking about her sister, or don't tell your boss about your secret plans, or don't tell your mother you pissed in the chicken soup when you were 12. This is being so lost in illusion you can't possibly ever reach young adulthood. Tell your wife the truth about your fantasies about everyone else, including her sister, and all those animals and things too. Tell your boss about your plans, your mistakes, and all that marijuana you smoked. And for God's sake, tell your mother about the soup. If the truth is told, you'll feel relieved, because you have been anxious in some vague way for so long you forgot where it came from, but kept it up anyway, because you knew something bad was about to happen, but just couldn't remember what it was. Anxiety is what accompanies fantasy crashes and near collisions. Depression is the state accompanying gridlock in Fantasyland. Most of us daydream a while and play in the world a while in just the way I have described, the time spent in daydreams being much greater. Learning to balance consciously the daydreaming and living requires a clear distinction between lying and the truth. What clears the space for that distinction is getting to where you don't care what anyone knows about you. Fuck them if they can't take a joke. I write this book out of a daydream of power and to work on the pleasure of thinking and brooding and to burn a few illusions to warm myself with and to create an imagined future that won't be what I had hoped for when it gets here. It is more fun to share and produce and create out of fantasy than to withhold out of fantasy. Not to tell you of my dreams of fame and power and money might help me protect my pose as an expert and keep you from thinking just another jerk wrote this book. But just another jerk did write this book. Who do you think you are? Detachment from the goals, projects, and evaluations of the mind is accomplished through a change in how we identify who we are. The purpose of telling the truth at all levels is to disconnect from and step back from previous identities. When we identify the electric perceiver being of the moment as who we are, that being like a 6-month-old child, alive, alert, and not trapped in preconception, we locate and anchor in present tense experience. When this occurs, we gain the power to use our minds as tools rather than as machines for the defense of who we think we ought to have other people think we are. I'm going to read that again. When this occurs, we gain the power to use our minds as tools rather than as machines for the defense of who we think we ought to have other people think we are. Most of us, most of the time, identify ourselves as our case histories and become embroiled in the dilemmas of the mind. By paying attention to the language people use, I can tell whether they are identifying with the case history and judge, self, or the being in the moment, self. The language of the being in the moment, self, is the language of the Lone Ranger's friend Tonto. Me hungry, me thirsty, me want to go. When therapy works to relieve anxiety or depression or delusional pain, there is a transformation of the way life is because of a change in who a person says he is. Therapy is not merely to modify the behavior of the case history self. Therapy has worked when the subject's whole identification with his case history is loosened, and an identification with his self in the moment predominates. When this happens, people talk differently. Of course, successful therapy does radically modify the behavior one would predict based on the case history. These modifications are a secondary effect of transformation. They are the result of the subject's owning and using the case history self from the standpoint of identification with the being in the moment self. You identify yourself as that light of attention that is on in this moment and was on in those past moments. Those past moments are merely records that exist in this moment, and that's all they are. Who you were before this second is already dead. Who you are is merely who you are now, memory included, heartbeat of time included, now dead again, now born again, now dead again, again. You see, all that I just said about myself is true. All of what I just said about myself is also a joke. All of what I just said about myself is just a memory, kept alive for a few seconds again, so I can feel consistent about who I think I am. Getting born again feels real good for a while, until we get to thinking that who we are is someone who got born again. That someone who got born again needs to die again, and get born again, and so forth. I pretend on the one hand to be an authority, and on the other hand to have no authority. Both claims are true, and who I am right now doesn't have much to do with the evaluations and judgments that make up the role of authority, or the role of authority who simultaneously claims no authority. These poses are meaningless. The value of acknowledging these meaningless poses is that the limitations they impose on my way of being are lifted. I may still use what I know and admit what I don't know without worrying about what it means about me. The value of getting free from role domination is greater energy to use for creation rather than defense. Who you are. What you are looking at now is a piece of paper with ink on it. Who you are is the one looking. That being you are, looking at the page, is the one to surrender your case history self to. That being you are, looking at this page now, is the greater context within which your case history personality resides. Who you are is a unique version of the wholly human prototype, with personality included.